Hello, everyone. Welcome to Electricity Canada's Conversation Series. Electricity Canada is the national voice for sustainable electricity and for its members and the customer they serve. My name is Farhan Mirza, and I'm pleased to be your host for today's session. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that on the land on which I'm broadcasting you from today is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Algonquin peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory. I would also like to recognize Canada as the land of the First Peoples, Inuit, and Métis. I would like to pay homage to the Indigenous peoples past, present, and future that continue to work, educate, and contribute to the strength of our country. I would like to recognize that the land is shared through historic treaties, developed through contemporary treaties, and one that continues to be unceded territory. Conversation Series is a webinar series that features Electricity Canada's corporate partners, and the series will highlight a variety of Canadian and international solutions to current and future challenges faced by our industry. Working with our partners, these webinars have been developed to be of specific interest to those working in the electric utility space from generation through to the customer. For a list of upcoming sessions, you can check out our website on the event section at www.electricity.ca. Before we get going, our session today is scheduled to go from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Question can be asked, and we encourage you to do so by typing them into the Q&A function on your screen. The questions will be reserved for the end of the session, and we'll ask them once this presentation has been completed. And finally, please keep an eye out for future webinars and events through our monthly newsletter, Current Affairs. With over 6,000 subscribers, Current Affairs is the place to go for Canadian industry news as we connect the national value chain from generation through to the customer. If you'd like to receive this newsletter, you can subscribe to it online on our website, again, at electricity.ca. So today's on the Conversation Series, we'd like to welcome ABB Installation Products, who will be talking to us about the importance of grid resilience for utilities and local communities. Today, we will delve into the challenges posed by extreme weather events and aging infrastructure and explore ABB's innovative solutions designed to help and strengthen the power grid. This session will help you understand grid resilience, examine the current state of Canada's electricity grid and the ability to meet increasing demands and environmental challenges, but also the impact of extreme weather, discussing the effects of severe weather events such as wildfires, flooding, and extreme winds on power infrastructure, and the importance of proactive measures to help mitigate risks. Our presenters today from ABB are Sandra Pedro, Director, Sales and Marketing in the Utility Market, and Dominic Tardif, Utility Product Line Manager at ABB. We'd like to welcome you both to the Conversation Series, and we will now turn the webinar over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Again, yes, I'm Sandra Pedro, Director of Utility with ABB for about just over a year, and in the utility segment for about 15. Dominic?
Yes. Hi, Sandra. Well, hi, Dominic Tardif. I'm Product Line Manager for the Utilities product lines here in Canada. I've been with ABB for about 14 years, and safety continues to be one of my top priorities.
So first, a little bit about ABB and our purpose. Our purpose is to enable a more sustainable and resource-efficient future with our technology leadership in electrification and automation. We will share multiple examples later in this webinar about creating successes by consulting with our customers to help solve their problems, addressing the world's energy challenges on the demand side, helping with energy efficiency, and on the supply side, helping build a zero-emissions resilient grid. Transforming all industries with automation, whether it be lean manufacturing or substation automation. We are a trusted partner in this journey. Sustainability is part of ABB's corporate strategy, and we aim to create value for all our stakeholders by embedding a sustainable approach across our value chain. ABB's key goal is carbon neutrality. We contribute to decent work, economic growth, and affordable and sustainable energy solutions. Finally, ABB leads with technology, whether it's robotics for the demand side or on the supply side, helping digitalizing aging infrastructure to meet new regulations, balance distributed energy resources, and implement cybersecurity measures.
Very good. Thanks, Sandra. And just to bring it into home as far as the division that Sandra and I work for, it's the electrification portion of ABB. Our mission is that we collaborate with our customers and partners to solve the world's greatest challenges in electrical distribution and energy management. Our leading portfolio of products and services encompasses digital connected innovations for low, medium voltage, including electric vehicle infrastructure, modular substations, distribution automation, power protection, wiring accessories, switchgear enclosures, cabling, sensing, and control. So why don't we make our way into the grid resilience and share some recent events?
Yeah, we don't have to go too far or too deep into the news headlines to see that our world is changing around us. Whether it's Ontario needing more energy capacity to meet future demand, or whether our Canada's power grids due to intensifying winter storms and heat waves, such as what happened over the weekend, we'll say, we've had to adjust to our new normal. Um, I feel that everybody is sort of changing their day-to-day process and how to adjust to this new normal. Wouldn't you say, Dominic?
I completely agree with you, Sandra. I'm still of that generation that has the reflex that when bad weather's on the way, we watch the news, we check for the alerts, and my first reflex is making sure does the generator have gas? Is it full of gas? And turns out, despite all the snow we had and everything was as cold as it never even flinched on our end.
That's really interesting. So curious about our listeners here today. Let's do a quick poll. What is the most important thing to you when the power is out? I think the poll should be launched by now.
Yeah, and I think what we're looking for is some short form answers. It doesn't need to be long keywords or would be what we're after.
I almost feel we should have padded this with a little music in the meantime.
Yeah, a little bit of Jeopardy music or
Interesting
Wheel of
how we
Fortune.
always
Yeah.
think of that.
Well, I can't see any of the words coming through just yet, so I think we got the poll coming through.
Okay, so
Well, we've got responses. I don't think we see them.
not
So
quite, I
people
see
have
them.
answered.
So maybe,
So okay, so
I can chime in. So we've got
Thank you.
safety, we've got what the issue is and restoration time, communication from the utility, finding an alternative, how long is the outage, heat, time to restore, safety again, when is it coming back on? So I think, we've got heat and cooking needs. But restoration time, seems to be the
absolutely
big answer.
critical.
I'd be
Excellent.
interested to know what the poll would have looked like had we done this in July, right? As opposed to heat would be cool, I would presume, right?
Yeah, I suspect as well. It's interesting. So it looks like our current listeners are really, really interested in keeping the lights on, in making sure that they have heat. I feel at my household, it's slightly different. For my teenagers, when they break out of that room, the first thing they say is Wi-Fi. Why is the Wi-Fi out? How do I connect to the world? What about you, Dominic?
It's the same thing in my house, Sandra. When we first set in the generator, years ago, we do live in a rural area, so generators are always kind of nice to have. The most important thing to hook up was to be, the refrigerator or the freezer and have the water kind of running. So you'd have the pumps on that and a few key lights. You didn't need a lot going on. But now the most critical circuit in that household, it doesn't matter what it is, it's Wi-Fi. The minute the Wi-Fi is down, apparently the whole household comes to a grinding halt.
Exactly. Social media, communication, in essence, data. Data is super, super critical nowadays. And interesting, the listeners brought up the point of wanting to know what's going on, how long is it going to be? They would need data to be able to understand that, right?
Sure, and if the power is out, it's hard to get onto your phone and find out what's going on, right?
Yeah, they have to switch to their cellular coverage.
Exactly.
Excellent. So what about from the other side, taking a look at from the perspective of the electricity provider? So we ask our listeners here, what do you think is the most important thing to your electricity provider when there's an outage? And we'll give you a few minutes. Again, just some quick short answers, nothing too complex here, just trying to get a sense of what your thoughts are.
Yeah, and we'll have to rely on our moderator here to give us the feedback to what we see here.
Give it another 30 seconds and then I'll share some responses.
Sure,
Absolutely.
Thank you. Take your time. Yeah, so next time we'll take a mental note that we need a little bit of background music for this.
Yeah.
portion.
Yeah. Well, I will say I'm lucky enough to have access to two different providers, and it's quite interesting mentioning on the previous poll about wanting to know when will things be up, and you can see that all providers tend to have now an active map. I think you showed me one this morning, Dominic, of your incident this morning.
I certainly did. Of all the days that my house could go out of power, it happened to be today. So I fought my way into the office very quickly to make sure I was in a generator safe environment, just in case, to make sure I could do the podcast effectively here.
But it was interesting. What you shared with me was a map of the outage
Yes,
and any little notes that was being
and the
shared with
little
all the
notes
other
that were in it.
consumers.
Absolutely. Who was affected, how many clients were affected, where
Yeah.
it was affected, and what the estimated time of reactivation would be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So clearly, like our audience on the first question.
Absolutely.
All right, so we've got some more responses here. So what do you think is the most important thing to your electricity provider this time? So safety, restoring power in a safe and fast manner. You want to know what the issue is for them? Is there a loop feed? Communication, safety, speed. So speed and safety seem to be the big ones. And what is causing this? So cause is another one there. So yeah, those are some of the big ones.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you to the audience as well for participating and hanging in there with us. So it's interesting, right? The most important thing, safety, I think has been consistent across the board over many, many years. For them to resume the service as quickly as possible, try to get the most and maximum amount of people back up, I think is consistent over the years. I think the biggest things that, biggest dynamic is that second piece, right? That communicating why the outage, how long is the outage going to be, all of that kind of information in real time is sort of an expectation. And now suppliers of electricity need to understand that and be able to provide that. So I think that's a big change. The other thing I think, and it was mentioned in the poll here, mitigation. How do we prevent this from happening again, and especially to the same people, so that you can customer delight, if you will. So it's not just about the lights coming back on; it's a full breadth of it.
Sure. And it's good reflection, Sandra. I think that's about what we were sort of expecting too. With that being said, what could you share with us about the journey that the Canadian utilities have had up to now?
So we'll refer to this summary chart. I think it's a nice view of since 1950 onwards. And what you'll see is first and foremost, utilities are asked to provide affordable, reliable electricity. So they're keeping the lights on. And this chart clearly illustrates that our supply companies have been doing this from 1950 to 2000. It even reflects on the fact that there was a requirement for generation to increase by tenfold to meet demand. So this ask of having to meet demand is a consistent theme here. What are your thoughts, Dominic, on what was causing this new demand?
On why the demand at that time period? Well, here's my reflection. Basically, when electricity was introduced, it provided convenient energy. It was a new way to being, we were able to boil water, we were able to keep the lights on, or at least, or I say have illumination at the time, right? To have a new form of illumination.
Sure, yeah.
You had equipment that started washing clothes, it started beating dough, it started, cooking, So a lot of this stuff is allowed people to be more productive, freeing up time so they could do other value-added activities besides just, washing clothes, hauling water, warming it up, and all this.
Right, exactly. And so this was electrification. And then if we look at the second era here from 2000 to 2020, things flatten out a little bit. And, comedically or not, it's because of all of the energy efficiency programs that were coming out, where we were now being asked to be more efficient with our electrification, if you will, with our use of that energy, and being able to make better use and continue with our amenities that we've gotten used to. And concurrently, our utilities were decarbonizing. They've now been asked, this new journey of going to net zero by 2050. So they've started the decarbonization of the electricity sector, and you can see things are well underway now that more than 80% of it is emissions free. So moving to the future, between 2020 all the way up to 2050, where the target is a net zero grid, once again, projections are telling us that the demand is going to double by 2050. Back to you, Dominic. What are your thoughts on that?
It makes complete sense because, it's the efficiency that we have in electricity for convenience. It's as we move forward, appliances, heat pumps, for example. Everybody, once you've gotten used to air conditioning, it's kind of hard to go back the other way. We look in Western and Eastern Canada, there's a real tendency to go on electric vehicles, which is going to be drawing down on demand for sure, and then more and more of what we don't see, the interconnected business practices, the data, the upload of data, every single bit and byte that rolls around out there requires a push of energy to get it stored, to get it pulled up, to get it transferred. And then just to complicate it even a little bit more, you've got AI that's trying to load in on top of that, which requires a lot of processing, and processing requires energy to drive that.
Absolutely. So more than ever, reliability of electricity has become so critical for our economy, for our businesses, for our life. And yet there's this net zero target that we have to get to at 2050 and keep up with demand. So I guess what we should do here is take a look at how are we doing? And I used to always joke that Canada was doing green before it was cool. We are very lucky to have a natural resource called water, and being able to renewable resource and being able to generate power in this country. And you can see clearly Canada is a leader in the world for renewables. It is actually doing quite well on its path to net zero for 2050. The world average for fossil fuels is 61% still, and in Canada we're down to 17.5%. So well on our way. It's absolutely critical that the net zero grid is essential for achieving economy-wide targets. The industry will require support from both federal and provincial governments in both policy and funding. And there are 3 key aspects to unlock this pathway of decarbonizing the grid. Clean energy supply and rapid deployment of renewable energy, as it's showing that we're progressing well in this chart. Dispatchable sources, storage, more distributed energy resources, and regional interties, so a much more tighter woven network. Aging infrastructure, we can't forget, requires ongoing both brownfield and greenfield investments. In essence, transmission and distribution system networks need to be updated to optimize their performance.
And there you go, Sandra. It's all about performance. And so how do we measure performance? Well, the good news is the electrical industry has established a set of standards and measures over the years that are commonplace across the globe. Utilities and regulators measure their system performance against a number of indicators that can be referenced from the IEEE standard 1366/2012 Guide for Power Distribution Reliability Indices. So the first one is basically the System Average Interruption Duration Index, quite often referred to as the SAIDI. Then there's the System Average Interruption Frequency Index, so the SAIFI, and then understanding the difference between the SAIDI and the SAIFI. Then there's momentary and sustained outages. And finally, where we're mostly here today, is the Major Events Day, or force majeure. And Peter Drucker always brought forward, if you can't measure it, it can't be managed. So of course, it's very easy to apply the concepts we talked about for SAIDI and SAIFI above and the number of outages into calculations. But the utilities are very cognizant, and they understand that they're selling to people, and there's the softer science behind that. And what we got to keep in mind is that after multiple rounds and understanding their client base and their business, there's 3 key elements that came from that. Basically, from a poll done, on August 2nd, 2024 by Electricity Canada, the most important one was having positive employee interactions. So anybody that's in business understands having engaged and well-trained employees is critical to your success. Number 2 would be providing high quality products and services. just like any other industry. We can't be providing something that's haphazard or not up to the standards expected by the clientele. And finally, customer loyalty and customer engagement. So that capability to be able to retain their customers and continue getting new ones as they provide their services.
Clearly, this was evident in the poll that people are very in tune with these three soft goals too for our utility companies.
Yeah, and let's be, I use the term soft, but I don't want to discredit it in any way, shape, or form here.
Of course. Major event days. Well, I would suspect there are far more of those in the current data set than in the past, wouldn't you say? Everywhere in Canada, no matter where we are, severe weather changes are here, and there are unexpected events, whether it's freezing in Montreal, forest fires in Jasper. We talk about snows just recently. We talk about floods in Toronto. Again, don't have to go too deep in time or too far back in time or too deep into the news headlines to see all these different cases. So utilities have to do their best with prediction algorithms, but also they have to think very, very in terms of being quick response, redundancy, and mitigation.
Absolutely, and that's very good, and it ties in very well, Sandra, because ABB's always had basically innovative solutions, and what we'll be covering today is there's the elastomode products that go for the underground infrastructures. There's storm-safe technologies. We have elastomode shielded surge arresters, and we have high-tech fire mitigation fuse. And basically, ABB has always been a trusted solution provider for many years. The elastomode product line, for example, is just celebrated their 60-year mark recently, and has always been listening to utilities and bringing innovative solutions to address the current problems. The trend definitely right now is to go, we're seeing across the country, and even to our friends in the South there. The trend is definitely to go underground, and it's well underway. And this is one of the proven methods to mitigate the risks against high wind, fire, flooding, heavy snow, ice buildup, or any combination thereof.
Yeah, I mean, let's admit it's super important that for mitigating any kind of storms, but also curb appeal. I live in downtown Toronto in a very, very old neighborhood where there's a little bit of a less exciting view right outside my front door with the pole. But if you go to these new neighborhoods, of course, you see beautiful, beautiful vistas because everything is all underground with underground infrastructure.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that because going back, my wife and I renovated the house in 2015 for like the third time. And one of the critical elements was getting that overhead line buried. Very important, relatively expensive, I would say, but it's true. It looks nicer. She was right, and I'm happy we did it.
I'm happy for you, Dominic.
Well, thank you.
So let's review the submersible tech that's available.
Well, thanks, Sandra. So, through the years, and I can't iterate this enough. It's always with consultations that we've had with our end users and our accounts. And there was a definite need for, at the time, what was a submersible connector that was able to connect a small transformer that was in a lamppost type of style system. At the time, the elastomode product line was nothing more than what I would like to call a glorified spark plug boot. The kind that you would basically see on a snowblower or on a lawnmower before they became battery powered, basically. And this watertight connectivity allowed the transformer to be submersed every once in a while, and it's kind of normal in snow melts or even in Florida where there's flooding. And it kind of launched us into this long process of developments to come up to what we know today as the elastomode load break elbows and the T-body elbows that we service into the industries today. In all cases, the elastomode cable accessories are safe, so they're submersible, they're dead front. They're in the case of a 200 amp load break, we'll be reviewing it here, have that capability. They're abrasion resistant, they're gas and oil free, so they're let's call them relatively safe. They're reliable. They'll last as long as the cable will last, and quite often as long as the equipment it's connected to will last. It'll even surpass those lifetimes. And there's even embedded technologies that are being considered or being implemented slowly but surely to be able to have digital communications with the condition of what that termination is doing for a living. They're flexible because it's you could consider these a little bit like Lego sets or erector set styles. The common designs that you have for the elastomer products is that it's interconnectable. You know, you could continue connecting one after the other, so you can make very creative types of connections. So you're able to reduce, you know, the space that it's used in, and you also aren't stuck. You know, electricity flows up and down, sideways. It doesn't really matter. So it's left to your imagination how to make that connection happen. So in the landscape that we see above, there's a definite tendency, as you know, if flooding happens, you know, it's you could plan for it, but when it happens, you want to make sure the power is able to stay on. And there's definitely a strong tendency as we go from the distribution substation to the overhead lines into the existing neighborhoods, while new neighborhoods are basically transitioning to the buried version. And you can see it on the drawing there where we have the little green boxes throughout the residential neighborhoods. The different green boxes do different things. But quite often what's common to those little green boxes is that we have elastomer products going from the overhead portion, doing the connectivity of these potentially submersible components. So whether it be vaults under these boxes or the boxes themselves when there's snow melt. So the first picture you see on the left is something we call our 200 amp load break elbow. And it's literally something that you could break a load with. You don't do it with your hands, of course. You do it with a hot stick. There's also attachments such as the VariSpike ground aid. That VariSpike is one of those components that's implemented or connected into a circuit where it allows you to spike a line. You're able to cut a line, confirm if there's power inside that copper contact without damaging the cable in itself. The former method used to be you'd spike the cable in itself. You'd cut off that cable, end up having to shorten the cable, add cable to it, or have to splice that cable for a lot of man hours and a lot of time and a lot of investment. While this spiking aid, basically, once you cut through it, you've confirmed that the line is dead, it's easy to replace it. It's a relatively cheap repair. Secondly, is especially when we're offering in adverse weather, is that it's always easy when we're doing installations of something like you see there, the shear bolt lugs. When you're doing this environment, the normal lug is a compression lug. It involves specialized tools with a very specific die for a very specific lug that goes on a relatively specific conductor. Well, it always goes well in the lab, or when you're in the factory doing terminations, everything's fine. You've got air conditioning, conditioned environments, and you're trying to get these lugs on. You're not knee deep in water, and you're trying to do this in the blowing snow and rain. While these shear bolt lugs are range taking, it takes simple tools to put them on. So you're able to have many conductors go into a common shear bolt lug. Simple tool to tie it in. So when it's cold and blowing and windy outside, it goes a little bit more quickly, and you're able to get everything going and up and serviced a little bit faster. As we make our way into you know, the product here is the 600 amp T-bodies that we see in the picture here is something that we've seen more and more prevalence coming into not just the underground connectivity or the connectivity of large equipment, but also into mechanical or electrical rooms, into new constructions. Because as you're building your new construction, no one wants that, you know, vault to be outside. You actually probably want to be the owner of your own transformers or your conversion of energy from the grid. And you've got rooms that are quite often not in the premium, you know, the premium sets. You've got a vaulted room somewhere that you've cordoned off, probably in the corner of a parking garage or somewhere in the basement of this building. Could be prone to flooding, but basically you'd be able to have in a tight amount of space all kinds of configurations of cabling and connectivity inside that building. It would allow you some flexibility. If you've got a problem on one circuit, you could quickly disconnect and reconnect, like plugging from one to the other. And the Elastomil product line has a whole plethora of, you know, ground aid devices, insulating caps, bushing inserts that could go on that for equipment measuring, for testing. There's also specialized elbows which reduce space, and there's I, Ys, and H connectors, which basically all have the basic concept of using up the least amount of space possible in a really restrained area, or giving you the most amount of connectivity potentials if you ever have to go in and modify something or resource or reorient the electricity in a relatively quick fashion. And this all came from discussions with either our end user or the utilities themselves, trying to maximize their existing space.
This looks like a very, very new installation and quite a clean environment. I know that most of our stuff is actually not found in that kind
It-
of environment once it's up and running.
It's an excellent point, because all these presentations, it's always the day they just finished installing. And
Exactly.
speaking from experience, anytime I've been into, these are above ground, but if you've ever been into a vault after the spring and the snow melt has been through and the winter accumulation is, our demos always show the submersible capabilities of Elastomalt products. You have this nice blue bubbly water coming up and everything. It's not like that. It's very muddy. It's very, it's very dirty. And when they pump all that out, it's very sludgy looking. So this is our products are in environments that are not as simple as we would think. The advent of the Elastomalt elbow came into developing also dielectric switchgear. Because the elbow had this capability of holding, its dielectric, able to hold back this electricity, we were able to start making very compact switchgear, which is dead front, just the same as the cable accessory products. And I wouldn't say this was one of the newer designs, but one of the modularities, or the pack out modularity, is something that we were able to put into a frame. And this frame is able to be lowered through an existing maintenance hatch. So when you're doing brownfield renovations or expansions, if you've already had the vault and you just want to have some more capacity, or you want to include a switch, or you want to include an interrupter, this modularity starts to make it quite interesting. So it gives you some adaptability. Hence, you're technically improving your resiliency. You're able to, reroute relatively quickly where your power needs to be, whether you're feeding or whether you're receiving it.
And this is definitely one of the ways that we can help our utilities come away from oil or SF6
Absolutely.
applications.
Thanks for reminding me, Sandra, because that's something that we don't even vehicle all that much anymore. But basically, because it's EPDM rubber, we don't require, there's a vacuum bottle within the system, but we don't need any auxiliary gas or any auxiliary oils to keep this thing insulated. It's a completely dead front technology. And this technology, of course, was, it wasn't just the vault style pack outs. We were starting to assemble these into configurations, as residential neighborhoods started requiring the power. It came into the good old fashioned little green box that we see by the side of the road, and there's many of them. Some of them are transformers, some of them are switching stations, some of them are control boxes. In our case, where we put into the boxes the pack outs that end up making the switch gear, the most common configuration is a 4-way switch, typically 2 switches, and with 2 sets of interrupters, all 3-way. And that's usually where we start seeing the benefits of being able to continue the power and limit, if there's any kind of interruption or any kind of issue, you're able to kind of cordon or zone off very quickly what could be going on, and also how you configure your loop. You could open the loops in certain spots depending where your boxes are all set up, to minimize the impact of an outage because of a specific event in an area.
Okay, so we've discussed quite a bit about underground infrastructure and how that helps mitigate and create a resilient network. A couple other things specific to storms.
Sure. Well, storms are, we know they show up every year, but you just never know when the day or when the hour is going to happen, right? So, you got to keep in mind switchgear, transformers, it's capital equipment that's out there. For a utility, just a pole mount transformer doesn't seem that expensive, but it is. When the thing goes out, there's problems, especially on a pad mount one. We have what we offer is called the surge arresters. Surge arresters is still on that Elastomalt technology. It's dielectric, but it's basically going to be that bleed out valve. If there's a lightning strike or some kind of power surge that's excessive, it'll allow that energy to bleed out of the system relatively quickly. And by replacing the actual surge arrestor itself, it's a relatively, let's call it, quick and cheap way to be able to get it back online, as opposed to having to replace the transformer itself, or that piece of capital equipment that was, servicing multiple locations. So it's one of those ways that we're able to make the grid come back on a whole lot more quickly. But there is an added benefit that we found to this surge arrestor, because in that capability of offloading all that energy, when there's an overcharge of energy into a transformer, and they're typically oil filled, or a piece of switchgear that we never know what's going on the other side, is when that capital equipment gets loaded like that, well, it gets a little hot, we'll say, and quite often, you know, the potential of having a fire becomes a problem. And if you have an oil fire in a grassy area, you can imagine how that can end up, you know, spreading through a neighborhood, spreading into houses. So that would be a devastated thing. So that's just an added benefit that came from our surge arresting capabilities.
So not only protecting the assets, but protecting the environment around it as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in older neighborhoods, you know, this is we've probably seen this, you know, when the lines are up, the lines are up and they go to the house, it's the way it is. It's kind of normal that utilities aren't going back and starting to bury everything, you know, as they show up, you know, as they do renovate, they'll bury, as they do things, they'll bury, and they come into the area. But the picture here basically indicates, look, it's normal. You've moved into an older neighborhood. There's some old trees or older or larger trees going on. And the whole idea of developing what we call the Homax Storm Safe was basically to have the equivalency of having something to be able to unplug, as opposed to tearing down the mast. When the branch falls across your line and pulls across the mast completely, you know, tearing the mast off, probably causing a little damage at the pole or even potentially at the transformer that's on the overhead system. It basically unplugs like an appliance. You know, it pulls off. What falls to the ground is the cable without putting excessive tension on anything else, and it fails safely. It falls to the ground with a fail safe. The power stays up on the pole part of it. There's an added benefit that we found to that too, is that when that fails safe onto the ground, it's a dead plug basically that's fallen to the ground, quite easy to reinstall. It's not generating sparks. And when we initially designed this, the idea was always high winds, there's ice, things are falling, you know, it's usually raining when this is always going on. But it's crossed our minds, and there's been situations where you have high winds like the Chinook winds in the Calgary area, tree falls across the line, it's not wet. You know, the grass around it's not wet. If that line were to come down and start sparking and arcing, you've got the potential to start fires again. So that storm safe product does become a fire mitigation product in the right circumstances.
So again, safety, quickly, easy to put back up, but also a fire mitigation
Absolutely.
asset as well.
Yeah, it speeds up emergency times. Absolutely. Which leads us right into this is a product that was truly designed for fire mitigation. It's our high-tech fire mitigation fuse. It's built right into the name. It's very hard to miss. The real benefit on the high-tech fire mitigation fuse is that, you know, when it expulses, there's no expulsion. It's when it's activated, most fuses have an expulsion that happens. It's a big shower of sparks, and it's pretty impressive depending on the line that you're protecting. And it potentially could light a fire. So the way this was developed is that we have we have a cutout that was in the proximity. We were working with a utility in Western Canada that had cutouts that was in the proximity of national parks and forests. And you can imagine, you know, that's a rich resource that we have. And they were quite concerned with the potential of generating any kind of fires. So by designing this fuse, we were able to, you know, let's say staunch that concern. We were able to offer something that they're able to use and mitigate that fire potential. But there is an added benefit we discovered, because when we designed this, it was for usually remote areas. We were always thinking fires and forests and so on and so forth. That's where we mostly see them. Jasper is one of the places that we had significant fires last year. But if you bring this into an urban area, well, you know, if there's a lot of people walking on the sidewalk and one of these does activate, you don't want that shower of sparks. People have cars or expensive vehicles. You don't want that shower of sparks on the paint job either. Or, you know, you don't want that in your little pool shed or even the side of your house if this thing's anywhere close to it. So it was one of those added benefits too. It's for the people's safety, besides the fact that it would be fire mitigating, and it's in the name itself.
And this is a great success story for us, and having those kinds of consultative interactions with our utility customers and doing something that's really responsibly and safe for all of us is quite an exciting thing to be involved with.
And and I'm all about safety, Sandra. That's how we opened the whole meeting, right? So, you know, in the spirit of resilience, you know, besides the specific products that we have, there's also something called ABB Ability that enables utilities as well as the end users to use energy more effectively and efficiently. It's got the added benefit of reducing the demand on the network. So when the consumers are reducing the demand, or they're able to mitigate the demand on the network, or it becomes very forecastable, we'll say, it certainly helps the utilities keep the power or keep the lights on a little more effectively. So from enabling digital solutions to building more resilient grids, ABB offers a range of products and service solutions to simplify operations, improve grid compliance, renewable power production, and maximizing assets management's efficiency.
Excellent. Well,
And
thank
back to
you.
Sandra. Well, thank you.
So I think in conclusion, I hope that the audience feels and has learned that grid resilience has never been more and more important. ABB is committed to continuing to be going on this journey to resiliency with our partners and our utility customers in order for us to eventually get to that net zero target as well with our sustainable solutions. So for us, that's our portion of it. I want to thank you, Dominic, so much for joining me today. Thank you to Electricity Canada for the opportunity. And of course, a big shout out to the audience for joining us and taking the time to listen to our story.
Well, as usual, Sandra, it's always a pleasure to work with you. I always look forward to our interactions. And I wanted to thank everybody for their answers earlier in the poll there. It's much appreciated to contribute to the or assist to our webinar here. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dominic, Sandra. That was an engaging, amazing presentation. I think
Thank
very insightful. So, like I said, we'd like to open it up to questions, and please feel free to input your questions into the Q&A field, and we'll ask them as they're received. So just to maybe kick things off here, and you can answer either Sandra or Dominic, and offer your response. Why is grid resilience important in the development of Canada's energy infrastructure?
Sure, I'll jump in first. I don't want to be dramatic. I think I kind of alluded to this before, but in the past, electricity was kind of one of this nice to have. I feel now it's a must have, and it means that much more to people. It's the backbone to our economy. It's the backbone to our communications. So it's imperative that it's resilient and available to us as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think it basically boils down to, Sandra, is that Homo sapiens, we're social animals. We get our news. We get it through newspaper. Then we used to get it through radio, and then it was through TV and telephones, and now we're getting our news basically unbeknownst to us. It's basically through social media and streaming now. So having solid infrastructures attracts talents and it generates economic growth. Good roads, good access to safe water are part of the basic needs. And once you meet those, your talent's able to focus on more productive work.
So resilient grid makes it a much more productive society. And let's not forget, grid resilience is critical for our utilities to ensure that customer loyalty and engagement is one of the measurements that they tend to track as well. So I think that's one of the reasons, or that's why grid resilience is so important.
I couldn't agree more, Sandra. Excellent.
For sure. Thank you. We've got a question here from the audience here. Is the current limiting fuse for wildfire mitigation available for use on a high voltage transmission system? So
yeah, it's a good question. I'll take that one, Sandra. Yeah, I'll take that one, Sandra. Yeah, so it's an excellent question. The Canadian version of the high-tech fire mitigation fuse has been rated mostly in the 25 to 29 kV range, so it's not available for the I believe the question was for 69 kV. I didn't quite hear it. We're just higher voltage.
69.
Okay, so something we could look into, but right now it's been designed for the medium voltage range, 25 to 29-ish is where we're talking about. Good question. Thank you. Thank you for the comment.
Awesome. Thank you, Dominic. So moving on, how do you balance sustainability and the growing demand for energy in urban areas?
As someone from the urban space, downtown Toronto, I don't know. I think for me, in my perspective, the informed customer is such a strong voice, and they're not afraid to be publicly sharing their opinions. So the new landscape is that utilities really need to be transparent with their ratepayers about the demand and how to become energy efficient it's a handshake between me as a homeowner and them as a provider of the electricity. Is how do we become energy efficient together? So energy efficient programs are absolutely critical, but also they need to be transparent with me about their sustainability journey. So I think that's sort of that delicate balance. And to use a simple example, one that we talked about today, utilities have to step away from SF6 or oil gear. They just do. They have to start coming forward into the dielectric solutions, and especially where they require a smaller space, whether it's new builds or improving on aging infrastructure. It's critical that they're sharing with the people of their urban spaces what it is that they're doing to make it better. Dominic, thoughts?
Yeah, well, because Sandra, I think you know my view on this. I've always envisioned that the specifications will be modernized more than ever. Design engineers and manufacturers alike will be challenged to incorporate, new technologies to replace what is, known to be already familiar methods.
Yep, agreed. Absolutely agreed.
Great. And then you mentioned several of ABB's solutions, and they were very, very interesting to hear about. So what role do those solutions play in addressing the challenges of aging utilities infrastructure?
Well, basically, we continue to be proud about helping utilities keep the lights on. I feel that we've demonstrated this over and over. It's so ingrained we sometimes forget to even mention it. It's by consulting with their utility partners and designing solutions that solve their problems, it's gotten us to where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, ABB's mantra, the whole smart, safe, sustainable. We heard the listeners talk about safety and sustainability in the poll. I feel the ABB's mantra rings very true with this segment, the electricity segment, with our utility partners. At the end of the day, I just feel very, very privileged to be part of the net zero journey, to be part of a positive contributor. I think we have lots of solutions to share with our utility partners to help them get there, and keep our communities safe, and keep our kids with their Wi-Fi, so that they're happy little people around us. Examples, like I said, storm safe, the fire mitigation fuses that one of the listeners had just mentioned. Amazing solutions, I think, that is contributing to this.
All right, excellent. So I think that's most of the questions that we've got coming in. Was there anything else maybe that you touched on that you'd like to leave our audience with today? Any kind of final parting thoughts as we wait for maybe any final questions to come in?
Sorry, I was trying to read this other one here. I'm not sure. Indirectly related to grid resiliency. Would you like us to refer to that one?
Yeah, there's one more question here, actually. Yeah, we can touch on that, but perhaps you may or may not want to answer it just because of the nature of the question. So the question is pertaining to potential tariffs that are
of course, yes, understood.
They're impacting our supply chain. So I don't know if you want to touch on that at all.
I think at this point we have to wait for the dust to settle before we would be able to give any kind of viable solution or a viable answer to that one.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation, so maybe we can wait to as we learn more about the situation.
There's only a few people who really know what's going to happen at this point. Yeah. And we're not those people. Yeah.
Yeah. So to continue about the topic of grid resilience and trying to make sure that we're mitigating. My only thing is again around that conversation is making sure that our utility partners realize that they're not alone, that it is a journey, and it is a journey that we can go on together and jointly try to come up with solutions. I think it's very important from an R&D perspective that we listen to the market. There should be never any question that especially here in Canada, ABB is as a proud manufacturer here in Canada, and we do have the type of know-how and technology leaders that can listen to what changes need to be made in order for us to surpass what's needed, instead of just the status quo. I mean, Dominic, you spoke a little bit about standards and specifications needing to change in order to accommodate the new requirements that are needed.
Yes, absolutely. And I can't iterate this enough. It's because we can't be operating each from our own silos. It's, you know, we can't dream up the products that are required by our utilities without having had that conversation. It's a partnership. They got to sit down with us, and if they're held up on some kind of problem, some kind of set, it's hard for them to imagining what we're doing in our factories, right? So if we're not sitting down and having those open-ended discussions, sharing and bouncing those ideas, having these types of avenues to be able to have those discussions, you know, you can't rely on the R&D manager to just dream up some kind of thing he thinks will be cool and it actually works. That's a bad way to bring a product to market. I'm still convinced that the utility industries is, I don't want to call it old-fashioned. The electrical utilities likes to go with what's been proven, what works. We're going to have to start doing some homework to get the specs up to date and, you know, start allowing for some new technology to come into place to continue moving forward in a modern way, and to make sure we keep the lights on every day.
Absolutely.
Well said. Well said.
Thank you.
Well, I think that's all the questions that we had from our audience. So thank you for sending those in. And I'd like to again thank you, Dominic and Sandra, for your great presentation. I hope our audience found value in what you kind of took the time to describe to us today. So we'll conclude the webinar here. All our future events, before we go, just to let our audience know that all our future events and webinars can be found in our monthly newsletter on current affairs, as well as on the events section on our website at electricity.ca. We will have some more webinars coming up later in this year, so keep an eye on that section. In closing, again, thank you to ABB for joining and taking the time. Sandra and Dominique, each of you, for your presentation. And we'll end the session here today. Everybody take care, and we'll hope to see you next time. Bye for now.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a wonderful afternoon.